This is Feeling Loudly, a podcast about the power of emotion, explored through the lens of astrology, divination, and music. I'm Jana Barrett, an astrologer, diviner, poet, and witch, and I'm here to help you feel your feels and discover your depths. Hi, friends. Welcome to our next episode. I can't remember what episode number this is, and I could check, but I don't want to. We're just going to jump in. So it's been a little while. I took a break. I was a little bit wiped out from some intense astrology and life stuff this past year. I meant month, but you could say year two. And it felt right. And I'm coming back now because it also felt right to come back. And I laughed out loud when I saw our oracle card for today. And I often have reactions like that because they'll just come through at exactly the right moment. But this one was extra trippy because I quite literally just drafted and posted a whole post on Threads about closure, which is our card or topic of the day. Not like 20, 30 minutes ago. It was within the last hour. And then I was thinking about closure all day. And then I brought out my deck. And of course, the card that I chose was closure. So it's really loud. And I think there are so many astrological reasons for that, that so many of us are contemplating closure right now. I know I have been for a good part of this year, and definitely for this last month, have been thinking about how we get it, what it means, how to go on without it, the purpose that it serves for us when we do experience closure, whether it's on our own or with another person, and all of the ways we can find it. There's this common idea that I see being tossed around a lot lately, and this is what inspired my post, was that I saw someone post about closure and how when we are craving closure from another person, we're often just not accepting that an ending has occurred. And I think that can be true for sure. We can be wrestling with reality and trying to come to terms with something and struggling and desiring more from a person, believing that they have the healing balm to offer us that we need in that moment. And also, what I think is true is that in our broader relational culture, which exists so much through digital communication and less so in person connection. And many of our relationships these days, and I know I'm speaking here in broad sweeping terms, and this isn't true for everyone, but it's definitely true for me that many of my relationships are one-on-one and they don't occur necessarily in the context of a community that continues to bring us together. And so if one relationship breaks down, there's often not that sort of community context around it to support it and to encourage people to come back together and either like heal together or like part ways respectfully together. There's not that sort of infrastructure around a one-on-one relationship to support it. And therefore, there's often less pressure for us to part in a way that feels more reciprocal and honest and direct and whatever. Because we often don't ever run into a person again, or we live in totally different places, or there are all sorts of easy practical reasons that maybe it doesn't feel necessary. And I think that also speaking to like ghosting culture and all this stuff, like there's a general expectation that we're not going to experience closure from another person. And the point of my post, which I'll just read aloud to you guys instead of linking it below because it's a little bit easier. The point of my post was that I think we sort of shoot ourselves in the foot at times because we deny a need that actually exists and maybe something that would actually bring us a good deal of peace. But because we're not used to receiving it, we dim and diminish the need for closure with another person. And so my post said there's a lot of modern talk about how closure is only truly found within. And to be honest, I disagree. I think this is a reaction to a relational culture that's still pretty averse to deep and honest closure conversations. I think we've grown so used to the lack of collaborative closure that we've convinced ourselves the need or desire is negligible. Like, I never get that, so I don't need it anyway. And that might soften the pain of having a consistently unmet need, but is it really true? Sure, we can find closure within, and it's important to remind ourselves of that, but I think it's just as important to emphasize the value of collaborative closure. Just because we haven't experienced that sort of healing much in our lives doesn't mean it's not valid, powerful, or attainable. It's not healthy to hinge our well being on it. That's giving away our power. But I do think it's healthy to affirm the need and desire and to make space for the grief that comes up when it's not met. And so this is what I posted today and what I've been feeling into. And interestingly, I did a whole episode on this podcast about closure, and it was the final episode of our last season. And I haven't listened to that in since it came out, since I published it. And I don't really remember what it was even about because I often just completely forget the content of an episode until I'm reminded of it or I go back to it for some reason or someone mentions it. But from what I do recall, very, very tidbit information I recall, I think I was on a different kick. I think I was on the idea that like that closure is within and it is this internal, inevitably internal process. Because that's where I was at in my own process at that moment when I recorded that episode. I was trying to achieve closure after a pretty heartbreaking ending that I experienced this year that was very confusing and really murky and disorienting, and so many words left unsaid, so many untied up questions and unanswered questions and all sorts of stuff. The type of situation that leaves you in a place where you're really seeking and yearning and wanting. And so I was in this position, and then I found this kind of breakthrough moment where I started coming back to myself and I was like, "You know what? It really doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. What could I possibly achieve through a conversation with someone, with this person, that I can't just achieve within myself?" And now it must be 2, 3 months after I recorded that episode, I'm kind of calling bullshit on myself. Because I see that what was happening for me is basically what I described in my post today, that I think I was experiencing so much grief over not having this need met, over not getting the words and not getting the care, that I told myself I didn't need it. And it can be this defense mechanism and this coping mechanism that's really familiar to me and I know is very common, where if we consistently don't have a need met, we might convince ourselves that the need itself is unnecessary. And I see people doing this in so many ways. And this particular topic of closure is, I think, an area where people really are kind of sticking their heads in the sand a little bit. And this isn't true for everyone, but I do think that we've armed ourselves up. We've put a lot of armor over our hearts and over our tender emotions and over our unmet needs. And we get to the point where we can develop a sort of aggressive, defensive, and hyper vigilant way of connecting to people where we expect shit treatment. We expect the trauma that we've experienced in the past. We expect to be let down. We expect to be disappointed. And so we arm ourselves for that by telling ourselves that we don't need the care, respect, decency, compassion, attention, like whatever, fill in the blank, that deep down we really desire. And so I'm speaking again, like broadly, and this isn't going to be true for everyone. I am sure there are a lot of people out there who will disagree and will tell me that this is not coming from an unmet need and that really it's been more empowering and true for them to say, like, I don't ever need closure from another person. um, I think that that's probably a very small percentage of the population. And whenever I see black and whites, always, nevers, etc., I bristle because usually there's a kernel of denial wrapped up within that, and that's what I sense from these broader conversations, which are so common in dating culture these days in particular. And, ghosting is such a big topic these days, and it's so common. And I think that because we really try to, again, armor ourselves up for inevitable disappointment, we end up in turn denying our own needs and maybe even setting ourselves up to experience more of that in the future. If our expectations of each other are so low that we no longer expect to ever receive a direct, honest, and kind closing conversation from someone that we had a meaningful relationship with, then I think what needs shifting is perhaps the way that we're relating to each other and the expectations that we have of relationships and sort of the standards that we set for ourselves. And that is a challenge. I think it's easier to kind of throw our hands up and say, don't need it, don't care, can do it all myself, hyper independent. It just doesn't land for me. And again, I have switched into those modes and I've done it several times in the course of grieving this relationship, like going through that process of saying this thing that I'm feeling is just not valid, and that makes it easier and more palatable. So, with that intro, I want to take us to the guidebook description from the Reclaim Oracle for closure. And then I want to take us into our tarot card and, as usual, into our song, which today is really gorgeous and made me tear up as I was listening to it. So, closure. This card features this big angelic figure that has what looks like a little door that's on their belly. And they're leaning over and they're staring down at a tiny little figure that appears to be running away, that's much, 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 much smaller than them. And the bigger angelic figure with the door on their belly is looking down, and they have their fingers on the handle as if they're about to open something up. And it's hard to say if the door's open and maybe that little figure has like run out from them and is leaving, or maybe they're about to open it up and about to share something. But either way, they're watching. They're hovering over this little figure, which appears to be more human, and they're looking at them. And I feel a sense of compassion and watchfulness and presence from them. Uh, but that's all we have. We have this figure, they have a crescent moon hovering above their head, and they're completely bent over, and they have this sort of vine that almost looks like a cool vine tattoo that's going all the way up their leg. And everyone's naked, as is the case all throughout this deck, which I love. There's a super vulnerability to that. But the feeling I get is like this person is leaving and this angel is watching them leave. And the person seems to be in a full sprint. They have an arm up in the air and their legs are like super wide. Like they are hustling. But there is this presence and stillness coming from the bigger angel figure. So, with that scene in mind, I'm going to read the description. Closure is not saying goodbye and it's not forgetting. It's walking back and saying, "Thank you for teaching me about myself." It's looking at the past with peace in my eyes. When I make sense of the pain, all the pain goes away. So the idea of closure coming from Reclaim is that a story or a narrative can be a really important part of the healing process. When I make sense of the pain, all the pain goes away. And there is so much healing that can come through the process of storytelling. I was listening to Sufjan Stevens earlier to Casimir Pulaski Day, and that is a really beautiful and really heart-wrenching story, and I would definitely recommend you go listen to it if you're not familiar with that song, and really any of Sufjan's work. Incredible lyricist, incredible artist who has been very impactful for me since I was a tween. I've been listening to Sufjan since I was like 13, and he was one of the artists that I would like scroll the lyrics from his songs that were most meaningful onto my wooden desk, which my mom later had to like refinish. But it was like this little tween thing, right? I had like Sharpie song lyrics all over my desk and little Dran, like just feeling the feels. And I was often touching into stories that were so much bigger than my lived experience at that point, but that reflected back pieces of me and parts of my story that resonated and that I heard in the lyrics of these really wise artists who were helping me make sense of my own pain. And music for me has often, as long as I can remember, had that healing quality where I will hear the lyrics in a song and I will hear someone reflect something back at me that has been so deep and unknowable within myself. And to hear it come alive in the words and the music of someone or a poet or, a movie, a film, like whatever the medium, seeing your pain projected through art and through the shares and stories of another person can be so deeply powerful. And I think what that is doing is it's offering us the narrative or the storytelling that maybe we haven't been able to create for ourselves. It's finishing our sentence. It's, drafting the words, the music, the lines that capture something that has been untangible or unclear within us and swampy. And this is part of the reason that I use shufflemancy so much in my divination practice and on this podcast is that I think it adds a whole extra element to hear through lyrics and through chords and instrumentals and just the vibrancy, the vibration and texture of music to feel emotions felt. And when I was listening to that song earlier today, I had actually asked about this relationship in question. I was asking for closure. I was seeking closure and was asking, like, what do I need to hear to heal? And I got that song. And that's not our song for this episode, but I'm just introducing it. And then I was thinking, like, so much of my healing as a person from difficult relationships and from, heartbreak and grief and loss and all of the really tough parts of my human experience, so much of that has occurred also through my own storytelling, through writing about things, and through sharing things. There's a sort of witnessing that happens when you share an experience of yourself and other people bear witness, and they get to even experience some healing from witnessing that if you're offering, that reflection and that mirror for them too. And so the duality of those two things, witnessing and receiving and resonating with someone else's pain, and also having your pain be witnessed and received and resonated with, can be two really deeply, for me, emotional alchemical processes. And I consider poetry emotional alchemy. I used to joke and still kind of do with myself that like I'll just put them in a poem. Like I would say that about exes and and people that I was having trouble getting over, like I'll just put them in a poem. And I know when I put them in a poem that there's this sort of knot within me that gets untied, or like this clogged up part of my heart that feels full and tense that gets emptied out and released through that process of writing. And today, as I saw this closure card come up, and it's something again that's top of mind, I was like, okay, I guess today my process is podcasting about this. It's about talking about it. And perhaps through this process of talking about closure, I can actually experience some catharsis and release myself. And maybe this is the moment. So TBD, we'll see where this episode goes. I'm not trying to tell a full story or keep it super long today, but I do hope, I guess, that for anyone listening to this who might be going through challenges and struggle with letting go too, that this could offer a bit of secondhand healing for you too. So, closure. Let's move over to our tarot card. So, today's tarot card is the Two of Pentacles. This is from the Lillifer Tarot, and we see a figure that is, as usual, naked and also has a crescent moon on their head. But this one has a little tail coming off of them. And they have more of like the angelic demonic vibe going on, which is a common theme throughout this deck. And they have two big pentacles that they are like juggling in each arm. One arm is sort of behind them, and they have this pentacle that's like weighing them down a little bit, and then one is in front of them. And the pentacles on this card look like the glyph for the sun that's used in astrology, if you're familiar with that symbol. So they look like the sun glyph, and it's almost like they're carrying two suns. And then right above them, hovering over them, is this really beautiful sort of pastel rainbow with some drops of rain coming off the bottoms, and those drops of rain are hovering right above the pentacles. So it's this arch that's forming above them. And then we see these flowers that are by their feet, and there's a little dog that's hanging out. And the scene here is like, wow, this person is carrying a lot. Like, if we imagine for a second that maybe this is the sun, that they're carrying two suns, like, wow, that's a big job to like juggle two suns and also to have this rainbow above you. And to be standing in this position where maybe you're carrying on one side the past and on the other side the future. That's not traditionally how I would think about this card, but it is how I'm feeling as I sense into the imagery here. And this card, the Two of Pentacles, is associated with Jupiter in Capricorn. And Jupiter in Capricorn is technically in its fall. Jupiter is exalted in the sign of Cancer, and its opposite sign, Capricorn, is where Jupiter is in fall. And so there can be a feeling of strangeness and maybe some wounds around scarcity that come up with Jupiter in Capricorn, because Capricorn, as a Saturn-ruled sign, is a sign that is attuned often to scarcity or to what needs to be conserved. As we especially head into winter, which in the Northern Hemisphere, Capricorn season begins in the midst of winter, kicks off right before the end of the year. And it's a time when typically we're meant to go more inward, and we're relying on the work that we've done throughout the rest of the year, the food that we've harvested, and everything that we've stored. And we're going inward and having to trust to some degree that the hard work we've put in will sustain us and support us through some of the bleaker months where we don't have the same level of abundance and cultivation and resource surrounding us to just pick from. We don't have the fruits growing on the trees, and we don't have the lushness and the warmth. And so it's really about reaching that moment that sometimes feels like a reckoning of like, do I feel prepared for what's to come? And here I am now. And how am I going to navigate this and sort of juggle maybe the responsibility of carrying everything through this period that might feel slimmer and tighter and more scarce. And so I say all this as we're moving into a week where we have a pretty heavy Saturn transit, Venus square Saturn, tomorrow morning, Monday, October 28th. And this can feel like that. It can feel like we're coming face to face with maybe feeling ill prepared or under resourced or struggling with whether it's like very real scarcity or ideas about scarcity. That feeling of scarcity and lack can come up in a big way. And it can feel challenging, especially in our relationships. And I'm recording this as that transit builds and will perfect tomorrow morning. And the idea of closure coming up in the context of this transit feels very much like this reflection back at us of, like, what do I feel is lacking? Where do I feel like I have not received the care that I need? Where do I feel like I haven't received the generosity and the attention and the kindness and the respect that I really need in order to feel at ease and whole and safe? And that sort of reckoning can feel really tender again, because when we've consistently not had our needs met in relationships to the point that it's altered our expectations, that is often a festering wound within us that continues to impact not just our relationships, but also our sense of self-worth in some way, especially if we see other people experiencing the things that we desire in relationships, especially if we know that it's possible. It can really hurt to not receive that kind of care and not receive what we need or what we want. And so, coming back to the Two of Pentacles, because we're straying away a little bit here, I want to read to you some of the keywords for this card so you can go ahead and root in the energy from the Lillifer Tarot. So, this is from the guidebook. For the Two of Pentacles upright, we have seeking balance, partnerships, transactions, resourcefulness, adaptability, and financial decisions. And for reverse keywords, we have physical imbalance, lack of planning, overwhelm, loss, and confusion. And so for the upright keywords here, you heard partnerships and resourcefulness, which are two things that are in question in this conversation right now. But there's also, again, the reversed, we have loss, lack of planning, confusion, and there's a sense of disorientation or, again, overwhelm that can come up when the Two of Pentacles is reversed. And while the Two of Pentacles is a card that's about earth, Pentacles being the earth element, and often that is associated with material things. Like sometimes the Two of Pentacles will have to do with balancing too many responsibilities or trying to figure out how to balance our responsibilities, juggling two jobs, juggling childcare and self-care, juggling relationships, juggling the things that we have to do to maintain our material world, but that can often feel like a constant balancing act. And that's what we see with the figure on this card here, is them balancing these two pentacles. But there is this very emotional and spiritual undercurrent to this card too, that's more about finding equilibrium through struggle and trying to kind of find our center point as we carry these things outside of ourselves. And sometimes when the Two of Pentacles comes up in a reading, it's actually a call for us to set down something if we've taken on too much. But more often than not, it is more of a call to figure out how to carry what we have in our hands. And so I think about this coming back to closure as sort of like, sometimes there is just something that we keep carrying. Sometimes we don't have the answers, and this grief just becomes something that we carry in our back pocket for a while until a moment comes where we experience catharsis and release, or where we find that closure ourselves, or well, where, like, God willing, someone actually comes back around and offers us the closure that we desire, or we experience something else that shifts our perspective or that connects the dots or that helps us finally feel more at ease. But very rarely is the process of healing just setting down one of the pentacles and moving on. It can happen, but in my experience, it's more often this continual process of realizing this is still here. I still carry pain over this, and I've just learned how to live with it. It still hurts. It's not gone away. I have not, like, tied this with a bow and left it behind me. It is still here. I'm still carrying it. It still hurts. I will still hear the right song or see the right image or just like feel this clutching sensation in my heart. And those feelings will come right back as if they never went away. And maybe it'll sideline me for the day. I've had days, I mean, whew, this has been one of the tougher grief years of my life, and I have had really, really, really rough days, weeks, months where I felt totally flattened. And the part of me that can usually access levity and joy and playfulness, even in the most difficult of circumstances, that part of me is usually still there and accessible. I mean, it's always still there, but it doesn't always feel like it. And in some of those periods, I really felt like a shell of myself. I felt so empty and so hurt and so just like deeply lost. And recovering from those periods was not so much about saying, I'm done with this, as it was about saying, like, I have to put this on the back burner for now so that I can proceed with my life. It's not finished. That's the truth. It's not done. It still hurts. It's still there. It's still real. It's still tangible. And yet I need to figure out how to live with it. And that's grief, right? Like, if you've grieved over a lost loved one, if you've grieved over a lost companion animal, over a lost home, a lost lover, you have probably experienced this too. It's very tempting to say that we put these things behind us and we move forward and we let go and we release and we do our little cord cuttings and we like move forward and we're done and we're powerful. But that has not been my experience. I mean, God, I wanted it to so often. And yet, the most honest thing that I did for myself through these experiences was to say, like, it's not done. And that is okay. It fucking sucks and it hurts, but that's okay. That's where we're at. And so I think there is a sort of a flavor of closure in just admitting that something isn't done, that something isn't gone, that something isn't fully healed. And like the guidebook message said, let me actually come back to it and reread it. It's walking back and saying, thank you for teaching me about myself. It's looking at the past with peace in my eyes. When I make sense of the pain, all the pain goes away. And the first line that I didn't say is closure is not saying goodbye and it's not forgetting. Right. It's almost about the appreciation or the recognition or acceptance of something and not so much the finality of it. And that's really where I'm landing, is that it's really not final. Closure is not a final experience. We might experience several dozens of moments of closure with a particular relationship or experience. And that might continue to cycle onward in a cyclical loop for however long. And there might not come the end of that sentence where we put a period at the end of the experience. It might just be an ellipsis that we continue to trace and that we occasionally come back to, or often. And that in itself is a form of closure. is the acceptance that something still hurts, the acceptance that the burden is still there, the acceptance that it has marked us and that we're forever changed by that experience, and that no matter what happens in the future, we are where we are right now. So, with all of that, I want to move over to our beautiful song, which is Promise by Ben Howard. This song is very moving. I have come to really love Ben Howard. I used to not be much of a fan, but I love Ben Howard now, and I think that's because of the phase I'm going through. Um, but Promise by Ben Howard, I, as always, will link it, and I have the playlist, which features like every song that's ever been mentioned on this podcast. I have that Spotify playlist link below, and I also have a link to the YouTube video of the song, which in this case is not a video, it's just a still with the song, but whatever. If you want to listen on YouTube, you can do that. But I will read the lyrics to you and then we'll talk about them. And meet me there, bundles of flowers will wade through the hours of cold. Winter shall howl at the walls, tearing down doors of time. Shelter as we go, and promise me this, you'll wait for me only, scared of the lonely arms. Surface far below these birds, and maybe, just maybe, I'll come home. Who am I, darling, to you? Who am I? Going to tell you stories of mine. Who am I? Oh, who am I, darling, for you? Who am I? Could be a burden in time, lonely. Who am I to you? And who am I, darling, for you? Who am I? Will be a burden. Who am I, darling, to you? Who am I? I come alone here. I come alone here. So at the beginning of the song, it's so quiet that I frequently, when it comes on shuffle and I don't know what song is playing, I'll look at my phone thinking that the app has malfunctioned or something, because it's so soft and quiet for the beginning stretch of the song, and it builds up really, really gradually to the point that it's just then there. And whenever I hear the opening lyrics, and meet me there, bundles of flowers will wade through the hours of cold, I just get this visual of people that are meeting and like handing a bouquet to like an ex-lover, and you're wading through the hours of cold. Like it feels like it's a winter day. It feels like it's dusk, and you're meeting your lover at the water, and you're about to wade through maybe hours of conversation and hours of cold in order to find something together. And it mentions winter, right? Winter shall howl at the walls. And we talked about winter in connection to Capricorn and that feeling of scarcity and needing to be resilient, needing to persist and to be thoughtful and resourceful in the way that we navigate this time of year that can feel treacherous in so many parts of the world. And so winter shall howl at the walls, tearing down doors of time. Time is a Saturnian concept often, and winter shall howl at the walls, tearing down doors of time just feels like we're piercing into something, into maybe this pain that needs to be told and that echoes back into time, and we're tearing down those doors. And speaking of doors, we have again the visual of the door on the closure card. And so tearing down doors of time, it's like we're moving through time, almost like traveling through time to reach something that is probably in the past waiting for us. Shelter as we go, and promise me this, you'll wait for me only, scared of the lonely arms. And so, of course, like when we talk about closure, the idea of waiting is usually present. Often we are waiting. We're in a mode of waiting, whether we're conscious of it or not. There's a part of us that is hurting and raw. and is waiting for the soothing balm, is waiting for the soothing words, is waiting for the care and the attention that it needs. And often, of course, we end up having to give that to ourselves instead of receiving it from someone else. But there can be this fear of eternal loneliness that comes up, especially after heartbreak. Scared of the lonely arms you'll wait for me only. Like, I mean, I know that compulsory monogamy, especially, and the fairy tales that so many of us grew up with and were conditioned into, whether on the screen or, told orally and projected on us, whatever. Like most of us have been conditioned to see a one and only and to hope for a one and only. And it's something that a lot of people deprogram within themselves and decondition. But there is this yearning that can come up. I know for me, I'm a Scorpio descendant. I am fixed. Like, and even my Pisces Venus, like that yearning can be so deep and so intense at times, to have that sense of completion, right? Completion through another, the idea that we're not whole as we are and that we need someone else to fill that in for us. And the fear of eternal loneliness that can come up at the prospect of not finding a relationship that really feels like, quote, the one or our person can be like existentially sad. And this is something that I've moved away from in a lot of ways, but that does come back around, particularly in moments of heartbreak for me. Like when I'm just, going about my life and I'm not fresh off the heels of like a devastating ending. I'm not like, oh, I'm looking for the one, I'm looking for my person, I'm seeking completion. Like that's not something that's really present for me. It only tends to come up when my heart has been broken and when I have that feeling of scarcity, where there is a deep, very raw part of me that believes that maybe I've just lost the love of my life. Maybe I've just lost the person who would change it all, the person who would be it, who would be the thing, right? And like there's some objectifying language in there, and that's kind of intentional because it can be objectifying to believe that someone else could do that for us and carry that burden really for us of completing us. And I think that that comes up in the song when we get to the part where they're just asking, like, who am I to you? Who am I, darling, to you? Who am I? Going to tell you stories of mine. Who am I? Could be a burden in time, lonely. Who am I to you? And I think that these are questions that we ask people when we want closure from them. Like, did you ever love me? Who am I to you? What role do I play in your life? Like, what is this? I need to know how to define this or categorize this or like make sense of this so that I can experience peace and resolution just in knowing who am I to you. And that might mean like in more of a like who do you see me as? Like do you know me? But it can also again be like am I that person for you? Do you feel the same way about me that I feel about you? Is this true? Was this real? Like all of those questions that can feel like gasps from the heart after someone has really hurt us, right? It can bring up so much of that deep ache around self-definition and worth and so much and wanting a lover to see us, period. And so then the song ends by saying, I come alone here. I come alone here. And so we go from this place where it's like the start of the song is about maybe, I don't know, I'm just hypothesizing that it's about meeting someone who you probably love in the cold, in the winter, in the scarcity, and traveling through the hours to try to find something together, and the idea of waiting for each other and fear of loneliness coming up and navigating this, and then reaching the end where this questioning is happening, and suddenly they end the song and they're alone. I come alone here. And so it's just this swirling experience of a song that I think so beautifully captures some of the layers of grief and longing and confusion and hope, right? Hope that we go through when we are grieving and seeking closure. Hope can be a blessing and it can be a curse. And I wrote recently about my experience of this relationship on my Substack. Actually, not the Feeling Loudly Substack, but on the Astrophile Substack. And it's called On Longing. And I'll link it below. It was one of the more meaningful pieces and one of the more healing pieces that I've written in a really long time. Speaking of emotional alchemy and catharsis through writing, I stayed up almost all night, just in a flurry. It was completely unplanned and spontaneous. I just sat down one night and I was like, okay, it's pouring. Like it's pouring out of me. I need to I need to have something to catch it. And so I ended up just like really, not even like editing a single word, just like flowing through this whole piece and just letting it pour out of me. And I published it and it was deeply, deeply cathartic and healing to write. And I felt like it had offered me something that I'd been seeking for months that I couldn't find. And I felt like through that process, I also healed some much older wounds from a prior relationship that in some ways resembled this one. And it just, I felt like I was I was a little onion and I was just peeling myself apart. And then a lot of people responded to it and shared their own experiences and the ways that they resonated and felt seen by what I'd written. And that for me was healing too. So it was like this ping pong effect of being able again to like witness each other. And so as we cycle down here and close out this closure episode, I think I'm seeing that like so often we want to be able to do it on our own. And so often we place so much of the burden on ourselves to figure that out. And of course, we're born alone, we die alone, etc. Whatever. Like we end this life like ourselves, right? Nothing lasts, everything ends, all that shit. But like we need each other. And if we can't achieve closure with the person who that relationship is ending with, and that's a common reality, right? We can at least share that with other people and we can find closure through each other, through each other's experiences, through each other's songs, through each other's poetry, through each other's art, through just late night conversations and vulnerable shares and opening up and disclosing the pieces of ourselves that feel still tender and raw and that need to be witnessed, whether it's interpersonally through conversation and community or whether it is through art and, creative catharsis. But we need those spaces and we need the words and we need the paint and we need the texture and the sound and the music to heal. And I think we also need to accept that sometimes it's not going to heal completely. Sometimes it'll scab over and then get reopened. Sometimes it'll be like the crick in our foot that never completely goes away. Or that might just last, until it's replaced by something else. But sometimes, again, the closure comes in simply accepting that it still hurts. And that stopping trying to constantly fix it or make it go away is maybe even the way that it eventually does go away. We don't hover above ourselves and try to force ourselves to heal. We don't lie or gaslight ourselves into believing that we're totally okay on our own and that we don't even need them and we don't even need their words and we don't even need their kindness. Because that's just another way of being dishonest with ourselves and of diminishing our own very human and very understandable needs for care from the people who we love. And so this is the sort of balancing act, right? The Two of Pentacles balancing act. We carry ourselves, we carry the burdens of the unhealed and aching and hurting and harmed parts of us that live on within us. And we learn how to just make it work. We learn how to balance the two. We learn how to balance our independence with our connection, with our needs with reality. And that is that sort of sacred dance and ever-long process of rebalancing that we go through, is learning to carry what is and what we wish was. Learning to hold our aches and our joy, and learning to just keep flowing with the reality that we're facing, while also believing that we really do have valid needs and that it's okay to feel grief over those not getting met. And sometimes that grief is actually the opening for us to have more aligned and beautiful and supportive and kind and loving relationships going forward. I'm going to leave it there. Thank you for listening. If you find this pod helpful and meaningful and it resonates for you, I'd really appreciate your support, whether that's a 5-star review on whatever platform you're listening on, or a comment, or a share. Sharing it with someone who might find some meaning in it too is really appreciated. And if you really connect with my work and you want to work together more, as I've mentioned many times, I have a Patreon. It's the best way to support this podcast. You can become a subscriber for $4 a month if you just want to show support, and also get new and full moon readings every couple weeks and some channeled messages and other stuff on Patreon. And then I also have higher tiers that have a lot more perks. Even my highest tier, the rising tier, which is $25 a month, you get a personal audio tarot reading every single month at the start of the month. You get access to our monthly group readings. You get 30% off of live and recorded readings with me. You get monthly predictive readings for all of Patreon that feature a pick a card reading with predictions, occasional only pick a card readings. Like, there's a lot. There are a lot of perks and benefits, particularly at that tier, but really at all of them. So if you want to do that, that would be cool. It's really appreciated. And of course, you can also book a private reading with me. You can join my Discord if you want to connect. And I want to re-mention that I'll be leaving Meta, specifically Instagram and Threads. And that's, I decided, is going to happen on November 19th. And that's the day that Pluto re-enters Aquarius. So I'm leaving Meta in less than a month, and I will still be on TikTok and YouTube. And I'll, of course, still be doing the podcast and sending out my newsletter. And I'll still be on Discord and Substack. So if you want to stay connected with me and you follow me on Instagram or Threads, please do go over to those other platforms and follow me over there. And please be kind to yourself. We're coming up on a pretty tricky week of astrology. And again, this Venus-Saturn square can feel like it's pressing on us and bringing up these aches on what's unfinished, on what feels raw and still very up. And with our Mars-Pluto opposition on November 3rd, this coming Sunday, that intensity. And with our Scorpio new moon, like there's intensity here. And so please do try to be gentle with yourself and don't force your healing. Bye, y'all. Thank you for listening.